Welcome to Dialogue Out Loud. I'm your host, Taylor Petrey, editor at Dialogue at Journal of Mormon Thought. And today we have an exciting episode lined up. With the release of our summer 2024 issue, we're going to give you a sneak peek into the diverse and thought-provoking content you'll find within this issue. Joining me today are the section editors of the journal, each offering insights into the articles, fiction, poetry, and reviews featured in this edition. So whether you're a longtime reader of Dialogue or discovering us for the first time, this episode is sure to pique your interest and leave you eagerly anticipating the release of the latest summer issue. Stay tuned for more right here on Dialogue Out Loud. I'm going to first overview some of the articles that we have in this issue. The first one that we have is by Margaret Olson Hemming and H.B. Franchino Olson, called "They Have Received Many Wounds, Applying a Trauma-Informed Lens to the Book of Mormon." Trauma studies has become an important subfield in biblical studies and other scripture approaches. And of course, the Book of Mormon is full of traumatic events that happen to individuals and the peoples there. This article applies this lens for looking at the scriptures for the first time to the Book of Mormon and lays out the reasons why a trauma-informed approach is so important to understanding both the events and the reactions to those events that shape the Book of Mormon peoples. In our next article, "Materializing Faith in Politics, the Unseen Power of the National Center for Constitution Studies Pocket Constitution in American Religion," Nicholas B. Schrum lays out a really interesting study of this tiny little pocket constitution. Many of you may have seen it, that was published by the NCCS and which was formerly known as the Freeman Institute, founded by Cleon Skousen. This pocket constitution shows up frequently in far-right political moments, often with LDS connections. And Nicholas Schrum looks at this as an object of material religion, not just a symbol, but a material object that has transformative effects. Henry Gorin's article, "Leadership, Retention, and U.S. Culture in the LDS Church in Latin America and Europe," is a fascinating sociological study that looks at U.S. business culture as a form of exported leadership in Latin America and Europe. And he does an analysis on the effects that this has on retention of Latter-day Saints. Our final article is by Newell G. Bringhurst, "Eldridge Cleaver's Spiritual Odyssey and Embrace of Mormonism," which is an analysis of two recent biographies of an important late 20th century figure, Eldridge Cleaver, who came to fame as a Black Panther. Bringhurst fills in what was given little attention in Cleaver's biographies, his brief stint as a Mormon beginning in 1983. All of these articles are so fascinating, and I'm really excited for people to get them in their hands. Next up, let's hear from Charlotte Hanson-Terry in our Personal Voices section.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Hanson-Terry, and I'm the new Personal Voices editor for Dialogue. So I've been reading some really great submissions over the last few months. And even though we don't have any Personal Voices essays in the summer issue, I'm looking forward to the next few issues where you can read some of the really exciting work that's coming out. And just a reminder to make sure you're submitting any pieces that could fit in that category. It's a really great place to be publishing that kind of material. Thanks.
Awesome. Let's hear from Ryan Shoemaker, our fiction editor.
Yes, my name is Ryan Shoemaker, a co-fiction editor at Dialogue. In the summer 2024 issue of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, I invite you to read two short stories, "A Man is Born When He is Old" by Gabriel Gonzalez Nunez, and Reed Richards' short story, "Mr. Lind." Mr. Lind explores two possible ways through life. The way of grace, beautifully exemplified by the story's titular character, Mr. Lind, and the way of nature, exemplified by Ziner, another character. Mr. Lind, a former pastor who married because his profession demanded it, is presumably dying of AIDS, and even as his pain-racked body wastes away, he emanates a contagious grace that is expansive enough to allow him to forgive himself and others, and to offer to others, even those who mistreat and objectify him, his time, a sympathetic ear, and a little of his hard-earned wisdom. In stark contrast to Mr. Lind's way of grace, Ziner, who's paid to do Mr. Lind's laundry, chooses the path of nature, favoring cold reason over charity, interpreting Mr. Lynn's illness as a sign of weakness and sin, and exalting practicality over genuine human connection. But even Zeiner, though he might scoff at the idea, is blessed by the light and grace that Mr. Lind unconditionally offers him. Enjoy Reed Richards' Mr. Lind and A Man is Born When He Is Old, and maybe, just maybe, look for audio files of these stories. Thank you.
Next, let's go to Teresa Wellborn, our poetry editor.
Hi there, I'm Teresa Wellborn, the poetry editor for Dialogue. In the summer issue, we have some excellent poets. So first off, Heidi Naylor has a wonderful poem called Newborn. And as a kind of opposite to that would be Hillary Brown's Tonka, Upon Finding Out the Colorado Springs Murderer is Mormon. Very interesting that both of those poems are in this issue because, of course, Newborn speaks to life, and then the Tonka speaks regarding death. So very interesting. We also have a poem by Shirley Mullins Glenn. She is a very well-known poet, and her poem Migration is short but very impactful. I love her writing. And then last of all, we have Reed Richards. He has a poem entitled Hand, and I'd like to just share a very short excerpt from that. What hand may still, with the haste of angels, lift everything that's ever breathed to houses of light? So check out our Dialogue podcast as we have wonderful interviews with Heidi Naylor as well as Hillary Brown. Not only do they have a conversation with me, but of course with one another. It's wonderful and worth checking out. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Let's now move to Caroline Klein, our nonfiction book review editor.
Yes, we have a couple of great reviews coming out. We have a review of a book called Sex and Sects, the story of Mormon polygamy, Shaker celibacy, and Oneida complex marriage. And it's by Stuart Davenport. Reviewer Data Logan describes how Davenport examines the cosmologies of these three 19th century religious communities, all of whom had radical approaches to marriage and sex. Davenport tackles these traditions thematically and examines topics like gender, children, and institution building, even theologies of sexuality, and ultimately delivers an interesting and worthwhile comparative approach to these three traditions. We also have a review by John Turner. He reviews a book called Fact, Fiction, and Polygamy, A Tale of Utah War Intrigue, 1857 to 1858, A.G. Brown's The Ward of the Three Guardians. That is a mouthful of a title, but it sounds like a very interesting book. We have here editors William McKinnon and Kenneth Alford resurrecting this 1877 novella called The Ward of Three Guardians, which is a story about a girl trapped in Utah, separated from her father, soon to be married off to an old polygamous man, and her flight to safety under the protection of her three guardians who helped her to get out. The author of this original book from 1877, Brown, he based his novel off of a true story of a girl who really did escape Utah with the help from her guardians. And Turner says that this was a very fun book to read. Not only was the original story entertaining, but this volume here is very much enriched by the editor's work to contextualize this old novella and add historical detail to the real story of this girl named Henrietta Polidori.
And last but not least, our fiction book review editor, Andrew Hall.
All right, I'd like to talk about 4 reviews we have of 6 books. The first one is Michael Hicks's Wineskin, Freakin' Jesus in the 1960s and 70s, a memoir. This is reviewed by John Engler. And Michael Hicks is a scholar of music who retired from BYU a little while ago. And this is an amazing memoir. The reviewer said, when I got this book in my hands, I saw the cover art, my 60s nostalgia, spidey senses kicked into high gear, and I couldn't wait to crack it open. If you're wondering whether this book delivered, here's the thumbnail sketch. Likeable narrator, check. Nostalgia, check. Unexpected twists and turns, check. This book delivered all of it and then some. It's really a fascinating memoir. It's not the normal memoir of Mormon conversion at all. Hicks goes through some very interesting twists and turns in his journey from the Jesus freak movement of the late 60s to a unconventional LDS person. So I highly recommend that book and the review. Then we have Liz Busby, who was one of the judges for the AML Novel Award in 2022. And she talks about two of the books that were finalists that year. The winner that year was The History of Honey Spring by Darren Cousins. Darren often writes about rural Western Mormons and does a great job of that, really brings that world to life. And this is a book set in the 70s. Again, won our award. It's a very beautifully written novel. And then the other one is Jacob Bender's And All Eternity Shook, which is a novella, very autobiographical novella, written in a very experimental style. And Jacob talks about, a fictional character based on himself who comes back from his mission and his mother's passed away, and dealing with the trauma of the death and his faith and the role that God plays in all of this. A very interesting look inside the heart of a person. Then Lori Rodriguez reviews Stephen Carter's Virginia Sorensen, Pioneering Mormon Author. So Lori's a literature scholar and a musician, and she's looking at this review that Carter did of Sorensen, who was the great Mormon author, the great fiction Mormon author of the mid-20th century, of perhaps one of our best authors ever, I think. Sorensen did a series of novels, most of them with Mormon characters, from the 1940s through the 1970s. And they're just an amazing collection, and a few of them have been republished, but most of them are not. Most of them are hard to get, but they're very, very high quality. And Carter goes in great detail about what these novels are and how they can speak to LDS people today. Again, I think definitely our greatest Mormon author, and has not been remembered nearly well enough. And this collection, this study of Carter's study of Sorensen's career, I think is a really key work in recent Mormon literature studies. And Lori does a great review of that book. And then finally, we have Adam McLean reviews two memoirs of people who have left the church. And he calls his review The Memoir on the Shelf. And he talks about the idea of a shelf where we put our doubts and issues about the church and when that can break, and looks at these two authors, both of whom are celebrities. And so there's that kind of plays into it. And he has some very interesting things. Adam is a very in-depth thinker about the way that people write nonfiction, creative nonfiction, and memoirs. And he has some very interesting things to say about Heather Gay, who was on The Real Housewives of Salt Lake, I believe it was called, and her journey away from the church. And then Jeanette McCurdy, who was on iCarly and wrote this memoir about called I'm Glad My Mom Died, about her very difficult life growing up with her mother. And the church is not as key of an element of her life, but it was there in the background, certainly. And Adam has some very interesting things to say about that. So those are our 4 reviews of 6 books. I hope that you see the reviews, and most of all, you go and look up some of those books. Thanks.
Thanks to all our subject editors for joining us today to talk about the summer 2024 issue of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, which is on our website now and available in print copy by order. To our listeners, thanks for joining us. And if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to leave us a review or get in touch with any comments or questions. We hope you'll tune in for future episodes of our podcast. Please subscribe and rate the show, and be sure to check out more at dialoguejournal.com.
I'm going to take a risk in this ad by saying the word holiness right here in the very first sentence. That's risky because the word can trigger all kinds of positive or negative feelings. I mean, sometimes I'm afraid to call something holy because it makes things feel sort of unrelatable or like disconnected from everyday life. And really, I mean, that's too bad because the word's actually related to wholeness and healthfulness, which suggests that maybe we can learn to find holiness in places we never really thought to look before. I'm talking about holiness like a fire. It can warm, but it can also burn. You might get smoke in your eyes, but the flickering flames are also really beautiful. If this kind of holiness sounds appealing, you should check out Fireside with Blair Hodges. It's a podcast featuring writers, artists, and activists who can help expand your concept of holiness to include the gritty, earthy stuff of everyday life. Come fan the flames of your curiosity at Fireside with Blair Hodges, part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, available at firesidepod.org and wherever you get your podcasts.
Dialogue Podcast Network.